I've been driving trucks for almost 10 years, and let me tell you, the road isn't always as lonely as people think. Sure, you spend hours driving in your cab, but it's when you're parked for the night that's when the isolation really hits you. This happened a few years ago on a regular overnight haul. I was parked at a freight yard on the outskirts of some industrial town. I don't even remember the name of it. One of those places with empty warehouses and lots full of old rigs. Not exactly the kind of place you want to leave your truck unlocked. It was around 1 a.m., and I'd been driving for nearly 14 hours straight. You know how it is, dead tired, can barely keep your eyes open, and just trying to find a safe place to park for the night. I found a spot near the back of the yard, next to a couple of other trucks, figuring I'd get a few hours of sleep before finishing up the route in the morning. I locked the doors, climbed into the sleeper cab, and passed out almost immediately. I don't know what woke me up. Maybe it was just the feeling you get when something's off. I rolled over, blinking against the darkness, trying to shake off the grogginess. It was quiet, except for the distant hum of a highway and the occasional metal clank from some machinery in the yard. I reached for my phone on the console. 3:12 a.m. Not exactly the kind of time you want to be waking up in the middle of nowhere. But something felt weird. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Then I heard some kind of strange, barely audible noise. Kind of like a light clicking or banging. At first, I thought it was just the wind rattling something nearby. Freight yards can be full of random noises, and I've heard my share. But this was different. It just didn't sound right, and it made me feel really uneasy. I propped myself up on one elbow and peered out the window by the sleeper. The lot was dimly lit by a few old security lights, most of which were half burnt out. My truck was parked at the edge of the lot, where there seemed to be a lot of shadows created by those lights. I squinted, trying to see if I could spot anything unusual. Then I saw it, a figure low to the ground, crouching near my rear tires. At first, I thought it might have been another trucker, maybe someone checking their rig or just passing by. But no, this person wasn't walking. They were too close to my truck. They were definitely messing with it. My heart started pounding in my chest as I sat up straight. My mind was racing. Was someone trying to steal my fuel, or worse, break in? I stayed frozen for a second, watching the figure. They were moving around to the front of the truck now, near the engine. I quietly grabbed my phone, trying to dial 911. No signal, of course. I was in the middle of nowhere. I started to panic but kept my eyes glued to the person outside. That's when I saw them crouch down, right by the front grill, as if they were trying to pry something open. My hands were filled with sweat as I fumbled for my flashlight, my only real defense. I clicked it on, but kept it low just in case. I didn't want to alert them just yet. For a second, I thought about just waiting it out. Maybe they'd leave if they couldn't get what they wanted. But then I heard the sound, metal against metal, a scraping noise that was both eerie and creepy. They were messing with the hood, trying to get it open. Screw it, I thought. I'm not just gonna sit here and let someone rip my truck apart. I clicked the flashlight on and pointed it out the side window, shining it right at the figure. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to sound tougher than I felt. The figure froze, mid-movement, and then slowly turned their head toward the light. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of their face, covered by some kind of bandana, their eyes reflecting in the glare of my flashlight. They didn't say anything, just stood there for a second, sizing me up. Then, without warning, they bolted. I watched as they sprinted into the darkness, disappearing behind one of the nearby trailers. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst right out of my chest. I stayed in the truck for a few minutes, waiting to see if they'd come back. I tried starting the engine just to make sure everything was still in working order, but the truck wouldn't turn over. That's when I knew they'd done something to the truck, cut a line maybe, or messed with the engine enough to keep me stranded. I was trying to figure out what the hell to do next. My phone was still useless, no signal, and the nearest gas station or truck stop was miles away. I was on my own. I thought about stepping outside to check the damage, but every fiber of my being was telling me to stay inside. Stay locked in the truck. Whoever that person was, they hadn't just been trying to steal something, they'd been trying to disable the truck, maybe to break in and rob me, or worse. I sat there, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline, staring out the window. I didn't see anything at first, but then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement again. The same figure creeping back toward the truck, this time from the other side. My heart was racing, and every instinct was telling me to run, but where? I was trapped in this damn truck. Then I remembered I had a tire iron under the front passenger seat. I grabbed it, clutching it like a weapon. I wasn't going down without a fight. The figure approached the passenger door this time, and I saw their hand reach up, trying to pry it open. My adrenaline surged, and I went straight into fight mode. I couldn't wait any longer. I threw open the driver's side door and jumped out, swinging the flashlight around and raising the tire iron. "Get the hell away from my truck!" I yelled, my voice echoing through the empty yard. The figure froze again, staring at me for a long moment. Then they turned and ran. This time I chased after them, not thinking, just running on adrenaline. I followed them halfway across the lot before they disappeared into the night, and I lost them. I stood there, panting, clutching the tire iron, my eyes scanning the shadows, but they were gone. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I locked myself back in the cab, waiting for dawn. The truck still wouldn't start, but once the sun came up, I managed to flag down another driver and he radioed for help. When the mechanic showed up, he told me that someone had cut a battery line and drained most of my fuel. I didn't bother telling him the rest. To this day, I have no idea who that person was or what they really wanted. But I'll never forget the sound of those footsteps in the night or that creepy guy in the bandana. I've seen some strange things out there on the highways, but nothing compares to what happened a few weeks ago. It was around 3 a.m., and I was on one of those long stretches of empty road out in the middle of nowhere, just outside of Amarillo, Texas. Nothing but miles of dark highway and the glow of my headlights cutting through the night. I was hauling a load of electronics, and I had a tight deadline, but the monotony was starting to get to me. That's when I saw a guy standing on the side of the road with his thumb out, a hitchhiker. I don't usually pick people up, but something about this guy felt different. He didn't look like trouble. He was clean cut, dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt, looked like a regular guy who probably just had some bad luck. I don't know what possessed me to pull over that night, but I figured, what's the harm? I pulled my rig to a stop and leaned over, opening the passenger door. "Where are you headed?" He smiled and said, "Wherever you're going." That should have been my first clue that something wasn't right, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was just grateful for the ride. We didn't talk much at first. He climbed in and we got rolling. The hum of the engine was the only sound between us for the first 10 miles or so. He introduced himself as Jason. No last name, just Jason. He said he'd been hitchhiking for a while, headed west to start fresh. That made sense. People run out of luck all the time and just want to get away. I didn't pry. About 30 minutes in, I noticed he kept glancing at the dashboard, his eyes looking over to the GPS, and then he'd stare out the window like he was checking for something. It was subtle, but once you're alone in a truck with someone, you start picking up on their weird little habits. "So, what kind of work you looking for out west?" I asked, trying to keep the mood light. He shrugged, scratching at his arm in this odd, nervous way. "Whatever I can find." That's when I noticed his nails were dirty, caked with something dark. I'm no stranger to grime, it's part of the job, but it struck me as off. His clothes were clean, but his hands looked like he'd been digging in the dirt. I tried to keep the conversation going, but every answer he gave was vague, really vague. The more I pressed, the more he'd deflect. That's when the real unease started to set in. I kept driving, but I couldn't stop feeling like something was wrong. I asked him where he'd been before I picked him up, and he hesitated before saying, "Just around, here and there." There was something off in the way he said it, the way his face had a blank expression, the way his leg bounced up and down like he was itching to do something. It started to feel like he wasn't some lost traveler looking for a ride, like he was waiting for the right moment. We were about an hour into the drive when I turned on the radio to cut the silence. The local news was on, and they were talking about a string of attacks. People found dead in remote areas. The announcer's voice was crackly, but I caught something about a suspect still at large. I glanced over at Jason. He was staring out the window, but I noticed his hand was gripping the seat a little too tightly. His knuckles were white. The coincidence of hearing that news while he was in my truck made my stomach turn. I tried to play it cool. "Crazy world we live in, huh?" He didn't answer, just kept staring out the window, his jaw clenched. At that point, I was on edge. I didn't know who this guy really was, and now I wasn't sure I wanted to. I thought about pulling over, telling him to get out, but something told me that might not end well. I had to be smart about this. Another hour passed. We were getting closer to the next town, but the tension in the cab was thick. Jason hadn't said a word in almost 20 minutes. Just fidgeted with something in his jacket pocket. I glanced down and couldn't really make out what it was since it was dark. It kind of looked like a small pocket knife. I could feel my pulse speeding up as my adrenaline was rising. My mind raced, trying to figure out what my next move was. Do I confront him? Pretend I didn't see it? I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My palms were slick with sweat. Out of nowhere, he spoke up. "You ever think about how easy it is to make someone disappear out here?" I didn't answer. My throat had gone dry. I kept my eyes on the road, praying we'd reach a truck stop or town soon. Then he turned to me. His voice was kinda low. "All it takes is one wrong move, one cut." I forced a laugh, trying to act like I wasn't scared out of my mind. "That's a messed up thing to say, man." But I don't think he was joking. That's when I saw a gas station up ahead, the neon lights flickering like a beacon of hope. I slowed down, pulling into the lot. "Need to refuel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Jason didn't argue, but his hand was still on that thing in his pocket. As soon as I stopped, I jumped out of the truck and started to fuel up. While the fuel was pumping, I was walking around pretending to check the tires. Inside, I was totally freaking out. I had to get out of this. When I got back into the cab, I didn't say a word. I just stared ahead, waiting for him to say something. But then, without warning, he turned to me and smiled. "You can drop me here." I didn't even question it. He climbed out, and I sped off before he could change his mind. I've replayed that night in my head 1,000 times. I don't know what Jason's real plan was, but I'm sure of one thing. It felt like I was one wrong turn away from never making it home. It was late, probably around 1 or 2 a.m., and I was running on nothing but bad diner coffee and sheer willpower. I was heading east through Arizona, somewhere past Winslow. If you've ever been on that stretch, you know it's pretty much nothing but desert and mountains for miles. No towns, no lights, just empty blackness. I'd been driving for hours and needed a break, so I pulled off at one of those tiny rest stops. Not a gas station, just a place to park with a couple of broken down picnic tables and a bathroom that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in a decade. I parked my rig and stepped out to stretch my legs. The air was cool and the sky was clear, one of those desert nights where you can see every star. It was so quiet, the only sound was the hum of the truck's engine cooling down. I stood there, taking a deep breath, trying to shake off the fatigue. I was in bad need of a bathroom break. When I was done, I walked out of the bathroom, taking my time trying to stretch out and wake up as I headed back to my rig. That's when I noticed something moving. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Out in the distance, maybe 100 yards away, I saw these shapes moving. There were 3 of them, kinda shuffling in my direction. I couldn't make out much, just that they looked like people that were headed my way. It was weird at this hour, but not completely out of the ordinary. I figured it was just some travelers or maybe some folks that broke down looking for help. But as they got closer, something felt off. They weren't walking normally, more like stumbling, but not drunk. They weren't talking either, just moving slow and in a straight line towards me. I could feel my stomach tighten, and I started glancing around, realizing just how alone I was out there. No cars on the highway, no one else at the rest stop, just me and my rig with these strangers closing in. I leaned against the truck, trying to act casual, like everything was fine. But I got the distinct feeling that something was wrong. I kept looking at them, and that's when I noticed one of them had already gotten a lot closer than I'd thought. He was maybe 100 feet from the front of my truck now, and I could finally see him in the dim light from the truck's headlights. He was tall, wearing dirty clothes. His face was pale and blank. He was headed right towards me like he was on some kind of mission. I couldn't see the other 2 as clearly, but they were still coming, slowly, like they had all the time in the world. Something clicked in my head. This wasn't normal. These people, whoever they were, weren't looking for help. They were up to something else, something bad. I knew it in my gut. Without making it obvious, I turned and opened the passenger side door. As soon as my hand touched the handle, I could hear footsteps speeding up and getting closer. I started to feel panicky as I hurried in the truck. I closed and locked the door, and I hurried across to the driver's seat. As soon as I locked the door, I heard a soft tap on the driver's window. I looked down, and there he was, the tall one, right there, tapping on the glass with his knuckles. How the hell had he gotten so close so fast? I felt a wave of fear rush over me as my adrenaline surged. He wasn't saying anything, just that damn tapping, over and over. I yelled through the glass, "What do you want?" He didn't answer. He just stared at me with this creepy look on his face. We were separated by nothing but a thin pane of glass. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my chest. The other 2 were circling the back of the truck now. I could see their shadows moving along the sides in the door mirrors. I didn't have time to think. The tall guy leaned in closer, His face was practically pressed against the window. He smiled slightly while staring straight at me. Then, without warning, he slammed his palm against the glass. I jumped, fumbling with the keys, trying to start the truck. The engine sputtered but didn't turn over. I cursed under my breath and tried again. This time the truck roared to life and I felt a moment of relief. But then came the sound of something hard scraping along the side of the truck. I glanced in the door mirror and saw one of the others dragging something metal along the trailer. The tall guy was still at the window, watching me, his smile fading into a blank expression. I slammed the truck into gear and floored it. The tires screeched as I pulled out of the rest stop. The guy at my window fell off, hitting the ground hard as the truck jerked and sped away. As I got back onto the highway, I looked in the mirror again. They were all just standing there in the middle of the rest stop, watching me drive away. Not chasing, not yelling, just standing there. I didn't stop for another 2 hours. By the time I finally pulled into the truck stop near Flagstaff, my hands were still shaking, and I couldn't get that image out of my head. Those creepy guys standing there, watching me as I drove away. I've been on that stretch of I-40 plenty of times since then, and I never stop at that rest stop anymore.